Hello, friends. Let us talk about the poem Game After Supper, written by Margaret Atwood. Now, about the poet, Margaret Atwood is a Canadian writer. She was born in 1939 in Ottawa, Ontario, and she is Canada's best known writer of prose fiction, and she is also respected for her firm stand on feminist issues. She's a poet, novelist, a short story writer, a non-fiction writer, a science fiction writer, and a political activist. She won the Governor General's Literary Awards twice. In 2000, she won the Booker Prize for her famous novel The Blind Assassin. She won the Pinter Prize in 2016 for the spirit of political activism that runs throughout her life and works. And her poetry and her novels are always not pleasant to read because they often remind you, they force you to open your eyes and to think about many unpleasant things. And through many of her poems, she tries to give expression to the fear, the pain, and the oppression that women have been experiencing, even in the so-called civilized nations. And she also, in an interview, she has mentioned that those in power had a responsibility to the community. And she exercises that responsibility to the maximum. And she continues to write about the suffering women, those who undergo abuse and oppression. So unless we talk about it and we voice the feelings, it cannot be ended. And that is what Margaret Atwood too believes. And here, this particular poem titled Game After Supper by Margaret Atwood. Let's read the poem and then I'll go on to elaborate on the themes as I understand. Game After Supper by Margaret Atwood. So the poem begins like this. This is before electricity. It is when there were porches. On the sagging porch, an old man is rocking. The porch is wooden, the house is wooden and grey. In the living room it smells of smoke and mildew. Soon the woman will light the kerosene lamp. There is a barn, but I am not in the barn. There is an orchard too, gone bad. Its apples like soft cork, but I am not there either. I am hiding in the long grass with my two dead cousins, the membrane grown already across their throats. We hear crickets and our own hearts close to our ears. Though we giggle, we are afraid. From the shadows around the corner of the house, a tall man is coming to find us. He will be an uncle if we are lucky. So a poem very innocuously titled Game After Supper. And it seems to be a nostalgic going back to a past time, because right in the first line the poet says, this is before electricity. This was a time when electricity had not yet reached their place. Many years ago, definitely. It is when there were porches. So she says it was a time when there was no electricity, and it is a time when there were porches. Porch, is the front portion of a house, what you would call a sit-out in many of our Indian homes. Now here we can see in a typical American country house, this porch was always there in the front of the house, and that was a place where people, especially after maybe in the late afternoons or in the evening after their supper, they used to come out, sit there, the whole family, They used to sit there and chat and play card games or some games uh, which kind of involved the whole family. And they could look at the road or the courtyard outside, or if there was a road close by, they could watch the vehicles and the people going by. So it was a very important place for them. So that is why she says this is before electricity, it is when there were porches. On the sagging porch, and when there were porches also means that these days in modern times, such people don't prefer to live in such houses. They would definitely vote for or go in for the conveniences that an apartment offers, because you don't have time to look after your plants, you don't have your schedule is so busy, you can't have you don't have the time to spend gardening, you don't have time to spend tending to your lawns, um, and living in an apartment takes a lot of burden off your shoulders. And so maybe that is all that is implied here. It is when there were porches. And on a sagging porch, an old man is rocking. In that particular house, which she remembers, maybe it was her own house, the parents of the house of her grandparents, the house of a relative. So at that particular house, there was an old man who was rocking in a rocking chair on that porch there. It was a sagging porch. Maybe the house itself was old and the wooden boards which made the porch were kind of sagging because it was not kind of recently renovated or maintained well. A much lived in kind of a house. The porch is wooden, the house is wooden and grey. So it's a wooden house, and it is grey in color. Again, you have seen by now, we have seen a couple of images of oldness and of decadence, a sagging porch, an old man, a wooden house which is grey, unpainted, or maybe it is grey because much of its paint has peeled off. In the living room, it smells of smoke and mildew. So that image of decadence is carried further into the house when she says there is this living room there and it smells of smoke and mildew. The smoke from the kitchen, so it's not a very big house because the kitchen seems to be in close proximity of the living room, and there is mildew, the stale smell of mildew. Maybe it is lodged in the furniture, in the curtains that are unwashed. This of course is not mentioned, but then when you try to think of where the smell of mildew comes from, it might be the furniture, the outer cover of the cushions which has not been changed in ages, or maybe the curtains which have not been washed. And so a living room, it smells of smoke and mildew. Soon the woman will light the kerosene lamp. So it is late evening, and every evening, maybe it is a practice. Every evening by 6 or 6:30, the woman, maybe the grandmother, maybe the mother, maybe the aunt, one of them would light the kerosene lamp. It was a routine practice. And so that's why she says that a woman will light the lamp, the kerosene lamp, soon. Because that is how it is done. Every evening it happens. So today too, that particular day when she has in her, which she has in her memory too, she says very soon the lamp will be lit. There is a barn, but I am not in the barn. She says the house also has a barn at the back. But I am not in the barn. So in that particular memory that she recalls, she says the house definitely had a barn, but that is not where I am. I am somewhere else. There is an orchard too, gone bad. Its apples like soft cock, but I am not there either. She says there is another place. Usually a barn and orchards, gardens, these are places where children like to play. They find something or the other to do, to climb on the loft and or to run around in between the trees. And so that's why maybe she specifically says that there is the barn but I'm not there. And again there is the orchard. It's gone bad in the sense that maybe the orchard itself, the trees are not taken good care of, or maybe it is a season where the autumn has already set in, and the fruits have been plucked, and maybe a few trees, a few fruits still remain, and they've gone bad. They've kind of begun to decay, because it is when the fruits kind of shrivel up and dry and begin to decay that they have a cork-like feeling, a cork-like texture, because the moisture is lost, the freshness is lost. So it might be that the orchard has gone bad because the harvest is over, and nobody is bothered about the few remaining fruits. Or maybe it is because nobody takes care of the orchard anymore. Maybe it is the old man who's rocking on the chair, who was interested in the orchards, but now he's there in the rocking chair, maybe too old to work. And that might be the reason why the orchard is not in good condition. So whatever it is, there is an orchard too, gone bad. Apples like soft cock, but I am not there either. And then where am I? So by now you start wondering, okay, she's not in the barn, she's not in the orchard, then where is she? And now she says, I am hiding in the long grass with my two dead cousins. Okay, so Margaret Atwood has this very sinister habit of shocking her readers with, you have dead people popping up, which kind of totally shock us. This reminds me of the poem which I've done a video on. This is a photograph of me, where a lady tries to say that there is a photograph, an old one, a fading one, and she says, see, this is, you can see the picture of a house and you can see a lake, and she says, see there, I'm here, and you would look at the picture wondering where she is, and she says, I am floating right, that was the day before I drowned, and I'm floating right in the center of that lake there. The shock that you get is, indescribable. So that's exactly what I felt when I read this too. So in a very playful tone, she says, I'm not there, I'm not here. And then finally she says, I am hiding in the long grass with my two dead cousins. The membrane grown already across their throats. Now how do we interpret these dead cousins? Is she saying that she is hiding in the grass where two of her cousins are already lying buried? Is it that she means? But then when we go further down, she talks about we hear crickets, our own hearts close to our ears, we giggle, we are afraid. So the we tells us that she's not alone. So maybe the cousins then were alive, now are dead. It can be in that. Or that is if you're looking for dead people, two dead cousins. If you're looking for dead people, either it can mean that the two cousins already buried there and she is somewhere there near them, or she must be talking of cousins who are now dead, no longer alive. But if you look at it figuratively, now this the earlier one was a literal interpretation, but when you look at it figuratively, metaphorically, the dead cousins might refer to her cousins who are now grown up. When she was hiding in the long grass many years ago, she was a child herself, and her two cousins, who must have been of her age, were also two little girls like her. But now all of them are dead, because the child in them, the girls they were once, they are no more. And so it is a figurative kind of a death, where she talks about the cousins who have now grown up into very mature adult women, and a membrane grown already across their throats. That again is an interesting choice of words. Membrane grown already across their throats. can refer to the membrane of silence that women learn to wear as they grew up, because they have lost their innocence and they are no longer articulate about their feelings. When you are children, you tend to be open about what you feel. You immediately tell people in their faces that you don't like them or that you like them. But as you grow older, you are trained, especially women are trained, to keep hold of their tongue, not to blabber, and even to laugh only when called for. So maybe this membrane here is the silence that they have already adopted as their own. So that is why she might be saying the membrane grown already across their throats. They suppress, and this particular membrane, it suppresses their voices. They do not give voice to their very genuine feelings. They give a lot of consideration to the men, to the parents, to the social customs before they air out their thoughts. So I am hiding in the long grass with my two dead cousins, the membrane grown already across their throats. We hear crickets and our own hearts close to our ears. So she goes back once again to that time when they're hiding there in the long grass, and now it's almost night, it's late evening, and maybe they were playing a game after supper. Many games, especially when you go to a house where you have cousins of your age, you tend to be a little more adventurous than you would be when you are alone. And so here she and the two cousins, they have been hiding. Maybe they're playing hide and seek. The game started out in the house and somebody would soon come to find them maybe, and so they're hiding out of his or her sight. And so they are excited, they giggle, at the same time they're afraid. Giggling is supposed to be a very girlish kind of an action, and at the same time they're afraid of being found, afraid of being scolded for going out instead of hiding inside the house because it's dark already, and afraid of the darkness itself. So many things which make them afraid. And this again reminds me, and maybe many of you too, of our own childhood, when after supper we used to all sit down, especially if you had friends or cousins staying over. You would play games, and slowly the conversations would, then you would slowly, after the games, after you're tired of games, you would slowly settle down on the bed, sitting, lying down. Slowly you glide into conversations, and then slowly you go on to stories, ghost stories, frightening stories, and you would clung to each other, but then you would still want to listen to the story. And then after the story is over, you are unable to sleep because your mind is full of all those ghosts that wander around. And then you are afraid to go to the washroom alone because you're afraid the ghost is lurking behind the door. You will not walk down a corridor because you're afraid the ghost is going to jump at you. So such memories all of us have. So when I read this, that also comes to my mind. So here they are hiding in the grass, and they can hear two sounds. One is the sound of the crickets, the external noise. The other is the thumping of our hearts, the internal noise. They are excited and their hearts are thumping out of fear, out of excitement. We hear crickets and our own hearts close to our ears. Though we giggle, we are afraid. From the shadows around the corner of the house, a tall man is coming to find us. You remember I earlier mentioned that they might be playing a hide and seek. So somebody is coming looking for them. Or it might simply be that suddenly it was noticed that none of the girls are found. Where are the girls gone? And so one of the male members of the family, who is not afraid of the darkness, he ventures out to find out where the kids are. So, one of these reasons, a tall man is coming to find us. He will be an uncle if we are lucky. And so she hopes that it will be an uncle, a relative, not a stranger who might harm them, but an uncle if we are lucky. Now, this poem seems to be a very harmless one about three girls and about a memory of the speaker of when she, along with her two cousins, strayed out of the house and they hid somewhere waiting for somebody to come and find them. A very innocent poem. At the same time, the writer being Margaret Atwood, it is always advisable that we look for meanings lurking around the corners, look for other meanings lurking around the corners, and also giving consideration to the point that in many of Margaret Atwood's works, childhood is not exactly presented as a very pleasant phase of life. I think this poem too should be viewed from a different light. And in some of her works, she subverts the myth of childhood innocence, and she often portrays children who are cruel, who are bloodthirsty, children who are scheming and bullying, and who hurt others. So such characters, like we generally we like to believe that children are full of goodness and innocence, but in many of Atwood's novels, we see children portrayed otherwise. Children you start hating when you read the book. Children who bully their friends, who torture them physically and mentally. And she also talks about child sexual abuse in some of her works. I remember having read the work called The Robber Bride, where one of the characters, one of the four main leading characters, speaks about her traumatic memories of childhood abuse. Her mother was mentally unstable, and so she was taken away to live with her aunt. And the aunt's husband often molests her and abuses her. And even when she tells her aunt about it, the aunt refuses to believe her and tells her that she is lying. And finally, once she grows up, the girl leaves that house, but then for long, unhappy, excruciatingly painful years, she had been forced to undergo the sexual abuse. So that is what comes to my mind when I read this last line here. He will be an uncle if we are lucky. So if we are lucky, looking at it in a very innocent manner, if it, as I mentioned earlier, let it not be a stranger who might harm us. If it is an uncle, he will take us away to take us back to safety, and we'll be very soon safe and happy inside the house. We'll be protected from all harm. But then, if we decide to interpret the last few words, if we are lucky, in satirical tones, then we are in for some trouble, because this can be an uncle like the uncle in The Robber Bride. An uncle who takes advantage of the innocence and weakness of little girls. An uncle who might attempt to abuse them. If that is the case, then the whole story changes. Atwood doesn't make any kind of insinuations. She just leaves it there open for us to interpret. But with increasing cases of child sexual abuse coming up almost every day, we cannot but avoid thinking in these lines too. And again, the uncle is significant because in many cases of child abuse, we find that it is the close relatives, people who the children trust. It is such people who often abuse the children, whether it is boys or whether it is girls. It is often family members, including parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, neighbors, the family friends, teachers, maids and servants, people who the child trusts. It is such people that often hurt them the worst. So maybe we can think of that too when we read about this uncle. Though it's a very unpleasant thought, a very unsettling thought, this poem does lend itself to that sort of an interpretation too. And so, game after supper ultimately doesn't seem to be a very entertaining game at all. It is a game that leads to nightmares and trauma. So, that is my interpretation of this particular poem, because altogether, right from the beginning, we see signs of decadence, sagging porch, grey, wooden, along with all that. So, maybe it is also hinting at the decadence of man, of how a society has lost its ethical values, of how people have lost respect for human relationships, of how people abuse others. So that decadence can also be seen in this smoke and the mildew, the staleness. So, as far as I am concerned, this poem of Margaret Atwood is a pretty disturbing poem. And looking at the structure of the poem, she hasn't attempted to divide them into stanzas. It is blank verse written in a very conversational style where the child talks to us in the first person. But on the whole, a poem which leaves some of the darkness of the night after supper in our minds too.